to their futures. Soldiers speak out. 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 Soldiers speak out.
Soldier Stories, Paths to Healing and Return is a series of programs produced by the Rachel Corrie Chapter 109 Veterans for Peace here in Olympia, Washington. My name is Dennis Mills, founding member of Chapter 109. Soldier Stories offers veterans the opportunity to tell their stories, to speak about their combat experiences if they were in combat, and how that experience and continues to influence their lives. Not only did influence, but continues to influence. Equally important, Soldier Stories informs our viewers about what the nation asks when it sends men and women into combat. And so we'll learn about some of those choices that humans must make in war. Tonight, our panel includes Ken Schwilk, Duane King, and Cheryl Daly. Guess which one of us is not a veteran, at least from the Vietnam era? Let's see. It's probably Cheryl. Could that be the correct answer, Cheryl? Cheryl, why are you here?
Thanks, Dennis. I am here listening to these stories. I'm here for a couple of reasons, and probably the main reason is that I have some training in psychology as a therapist. And I am here because sometimes when people are telling stories, especially if they're combat stories, the trauma returns. And that's part of the healing process, so it's not a bad thing. But it's important that we provide a safe container and that we know what to do if that happens. We haven't really seen that happen on the show, but I'm here to make sure that if it does, we are ready to be there in the way that we need to be there. For this to be a healing experience and not to be a re-traumatizing experience. And I'm also here because these guys have some fascinating stories to tell, and so I'm here to occasionally throw in my own questions, especially if I think that they might be, especially when I think it's particularly relevant to our active duty people who are coming back now and might be wondering what it looks like and what the opportunities are to get some help to process some of these experiences that they've had so they can move on with their lives. So I'll be doing a whole lot of listening tonight, and occasionally I might have something to say, but hopefully, mostly you'll be hearing the stories that the veterans have to share tonight.
Thank you, Cheryl. And we've included, or actually asked our panelists to interact with each other, so when they feel like asking Duane to ask Ken, something that's similar, to do that. Both Ken and Duane are members of Veterans for Peace, Chapter 109, and I've known them for a number of years. Guys, one of the questions that I normally ask people in Soldier Stories is to say, how was it that you entered the service? Now, not everyone realizes that there was a draft going on or other situations that gave us the opportunity to be in uniform, as today people enlist by choice for one reason or another. So I'm going to ask each of you, starting with Ken. Ken, how did you happen to get into the service?
Well, I was drafted, but before that, I guess that I had graduated from college. And at the time, the Vietnam War was just really starting up at that stage. It was really building at that stage.
That was around 66, somewhere.
Yeah, 67 is when
67, okay.
when I graduated, and I decided that the military was not for me. That I wanted to serve my country in a different way, and that was through the Peace Corps. So I signed up for Peace Corps training and was accepted, and was in training for approximately a month and a half. And realized, in terms of my maturity at that time, that I really wasn't ready to go overseas. So I dropped out of Peace Corps training, realizing that I probably would be drafted sometime in the future. And it was it was a March of let's see, 1968, that 40,000 people were drafted, and I was one of the 40,000 people that were drafted that month. So that's how I got into the service, and my whole plan was to get in and get out as quickly as possible. I decided enlisting would be 3 years. This way, it would be a 2-year commitment, and I would do everything possible not to find myself in a combat situation if I could avoid it.
So you were drafted in the U.S. Army then?
In the U.S. Army, that's correct. Yes.
Yeah. Now, Duane, very curious as to how you happened to get in the service. I know you've had quite a few different opportunities to be overseas, but you also were during the Korean conflict.
Yes.
There, and tell our viewing audience, how did you happen to go in uniform during that time?
Well, I happened to be maybe among the very youngest of the Korea veterans, so I'm not as old as I look. And
go ahead, youngster, tell us your story there.
But I graduated from high school at age 17, and I was born during the Depression, in the year in which the United States had the lowest birth rate ever due to the Depression. So there are relatively very few people of my exact age. And so when I graduated from high school, virtually all of my classmates were drafted within a year and a half at least, or sooner. And so, but I was only 7.
That was the draft during the Korean
Yes,
conflict.
that's right. That's right.
Okay, so just in case our viewing audience doesn't understand,
yes.
there were 2 different draft periods going on. One was during
That's
the
right.
Korean conflict, and then during the Vietnam era.
Actually, there was a draft going on after the Korea conflict, but those draftees did not receive any education benefits. There was no GI Bill for them. But they nevertheless did serve, and they are probably often referred to as ex-servicemen, or rather, or
So
ex-service
you
women.
were drafted then?
No, I couldn't be drafted because I was 17. But I graduated. The employment situation was not good generally, and I was 17 when I graduated, and when I was immediately required to be self-supporting. I didn't have any other family resources to fall back upon after I graduated. So I was really strapped for a way to live, a way to support myself and to stay off the streets. And I could not be hired because every time I would go to look for a job, first of all, Oregon at that time had very strict child labor laws, and a person under 18 could not be employed in a dangerous situation, which meant I couldn't even be a bicycle courier. And I certainly couldn't work at a bowling alley setting pins. And I couldn't wash dishes in a kitchen where there's all that
There's
steam.
some real irony there,
Yes.
Duane. Ken, did you get the irony of this? We can send him off to combat,
Right.
put him in
That's
harm's
right.
way, but he can't get a
But I
job in
couldn't,
Oregon as a 17-year-old.
I couldn't get a job.
Okay.
And when I did apply, they would the prospective on the employment form was a line that said draft status, and I would have to fill in none because I didn't have a draft card. I wasn't one. You know, they were looking for people who were other than 1A, which meant highly qualified, even if they might not have had teeth. But so they were looking. Employers were looking for people in my age bracket who were 2B or something like that. But mine was none, and so the employee, during the interviews, they would always say, "Come back when you have your draft card, because we don't want to hire a person and have them taken away after we've gotten them started." And so I was up against it, and I hated the idea of military, and I hated the idea of war. But one has to eat and get clothing and get a roof over one's head. And so I did find that in the Army, and my mother did agree to give me permission to enlist.
You can really identify with today's, and I'll call it poverty draft, where people are feeling very few options for them after high school,
Right.
and they enlist.
Even though I was not eligible for the draft, I could enlist. So I was regular Army,
Okay.
and I served in the Army for 3 years. And that's how I happened to be in the
and
Army.
you served in the Army, regular Army, for 3 years
Yes.
during that Korean conflict era.
Well, in the last year and a half or so, I was not, the Korean conflict period came to an official end. The state of emergency was declared over, even though there was still shooting going on up on the DMZ sporadically. The demilitarized zone, that's near the 38th parallel between South Korea and North Korea, which was agreed upon in so-called armistice negotiations.
Now, when you went into the service, you went through basic training
Yes, at Fort Ord.
at Fort Ord, California.
in the
Yes,
sixth-
I
yeah.
went to Fort Ord, California as well.
In the 6th Infantry Division.
Okay. And Ken, when you went into the service, you did your basic training where?
Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri. I lived in
Missouri.
Chicago area at the time,
Okay.
and that's where they.
And then
that's where they
after
sent
that
us.
basic training, did you have an idea of what was going to happen to Ken Schwilk?
Well, I got my orders. It said that I was going to be in survival training at Fort Huachuca in Arizona. So that was kind of frightening to me at that point. And it turned out to be a radio school is what it
Radio
was.
school.
Carrying the PRC-25 on your back.
A
Which
target,
is,
in other
right,
words.
right, a target.
Wow.
If that's usually the first one to get shot in in the platoon. It's the person who's carrying the radio.
Yeah, and Corbin
I said to
next.
myself, that's not a good plan. So my whole approach was okay. There was ways for me to move to a different skill level, and that would be radio teletype. But I had to achieve a certain level of performance in terms of taking code and sending code during a certain period of time. So that's what I did, and I achieved that and was able to get to radio teletype school in Fort Gordon, Georgia.
I
So it
see.
extended my time in training, and thinking then that there was a good possibility I wouldn't go to Vietnam. Well, that's not what happened. I did go to Vietnam for 1 year. And I was 22, 23 years old, probably one of the older.
So you were the
people.
old man in the group.
Yeah, right. And
And
when
a
I-
college grad yet.
Yeah, and when I
And not an officer.
right, and well, I did that for a very
Well,
good
a
reason.
number of
I
us
thought.
did that too, yeah.
I mean, I realized that with the questions that they were asking me in the OCS questionnaire, that they wanted a certain type of person, and I just basically said, I'm not going to answer these questions this way. I don't care whether I believe that or not. I don't want to go into OCS, and I don't want them to think that I'm OCS material. I want to get out of the military as quickly as I can. And I was in a situation where I was graduated in political science and had a number of courses in what was going on in the world, obviously in Vietnam, and the whole question of deterrence. The reason why we were there was to create a deterrence against the movement of communism and not have to use nuclear weapons. And this was our deterrence. And I didn't believe that.
Yeah,
I
we were
thought it
to
was-
frighten both China
Right.
and the Soviet
Right,
Union.
exactly. And the more I studied that, I said to myself, "This does not make any sense. This is ridiculous. People are dying for a policy. I mean, what do they call it again? Where they were concerned about the communism spreading. I can't even think of what it's
Domino?
called.
Is that the domino?
The
thing?
domino
Domino
effect.
effect,
Yeah.
yes.
Domino effect.
And I didn't believe in that, but that was the reason that we were there, from what I could see, and I just thought, well, my options are I can either stay in the military or desert and go to Canada. And frankly, there have been people, even Vietnam vets today, I think, that have said, well, that's terrible that somebody did that. I don't feel that way at all. I think that was a decision that, it was a difficult decision for any one of us to make. And in many cases, it took more courage at that point, to make that decision than to stay in the Army. And I've always felt that way, that was the way it was. So I went to Vietnam with the idea that I would be there for a year and make the best of it. But then I had one very unusual experience when I got into the country. They didn't know where my unit was.
Let me get this straight. You had orders to go to Vietnam.
Vietnam, yes.
Oh, yeah.
And it's hello world.
Yeah.
Here's Ken Schwilk.
That's right. Here's Ken Schwilk.
Does anyone want me?
Arrive at Cam Bay, and they say, okay, you need to go up to Queen Yan. So I was up at Queen Yan. No, that wasn't the place to be. So then I was there for a day or so. Then I went to Nha Trang for 2 or 3 days.
You got to be a world traveler.
Right. It was like, well, maybe there's a way in which I could just leave country and no one will ever find me. I mean, it was like, what am I here for? No one really knows where I'm supposed to be. Well, eventually, after about 7 days, I finally found a unit they
had moved on,
where I had ended up for the next year. So.
And you were with them for a year as a radioman.
Well, actually, I had gone through radio teletype school now, so I was assigned to the 1st Aviation Brigade, which was headquartered in Long Binh, which was a major base, one of the real major bases, Army bases in Vietnam.
Okay.
40,000 were.
We'll come back to you, Ken, on that one. And we have you now with a found unit.
That's right. I'm there. Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
Duane, I know you're an excellent storyteller.
Yeah.
How on earth did you get to Korea? I mean, that was
Well,
high on your list of world sites to see?
As my colleague and excellent friend, I was also sent to the Signal Corps because when I was inducted and I went to what we called at that time a Repel Depot, which means replacement depot, and in Fort Ord, and they gave us this battery of tests, and they called me out after the tests alone. I was called out, and they told me I had to go take more tests. And I thought, how did I screw this up? I don't want to be back on the streets again. And so I went back in, and I took the additional battery of tests. And after that, a corporal called me into the office and said, how would you like to be an officer? And I said, well, that sounds a hell of a lot better than now. It'd be more money, right? He says, yes, much more money. I said, well, what does it mean? He said, well, you'll have to go to advanced infantry training after you finish your basic infantry training. And I thought, I don't want to get any more infantry training because I don't want to be a rifleman. And so an officer came by at that point and berated the corporal because he said the Army doesn't want any 17-year-old second lieutenants. And they said, when I was 18 and a half, that I should apply again. And I thought, like hell. Damn if I'm ever going to sign up for the infantry. 8 weeks of advanced infantry, heavy weapons? Hell no. So I never did. And besides which, I was already in the Army for nearly a year and a half. I was going to get out in a year and a half, and if I had gone to basic officer training school, that would have been another 3 years, and I would have been in the reserves for the rest of my life. So it didn't sound very attractive. And so instead, they sent me to the Fort Monmouth Signal School, where I went to advanced electronics training and was given the military occupation specialty of long-distance radio and very high-frequency microwave and trunk line communications. The title was Repeater Chief. But so although I was in the Signal Corps, I was not in the unfortunate position of having to carry a radio while people shot at me. So
neither was I, by the way.
Yeah. So that's how I ended up in Korea. They sent me there to serve first I went to the 9th Corps, and then that was phased out, and I was transferred to Army Forces Far East here. Mm-hmm. And the U.S. 8th Army here. And that meant that I was very close to the general's flagpole. And so my experience in Korea was not bad at all. I had foreign travel. I became acquainted with Japanese and Korean culture, Confucianism, Buddhism, things like that. Reverence for age, which I still believe in strongly, more every year, by the way. And so then I learned a lot about electronics, and I had a job that kept me indoors.
So you were not out in combat units then in Korea? As such,
No.
Or
Well,
as today we say MASH and other things.
Right. Well,
that wasn't the culture that
those
you were part of.
Those were 40, 50 miles, sometimes 150 miles away from me, because I was on a mountaintop with infantry all around the bottom, and or Marines in the case when I was down in the Pusan perimeter. The First Marine Air Wing was right there, and so I was well protected. Besides which, the Korean people, the South Koreans loved us. Mm-hmm. They wanted us there. They were happy that we were there. The only problem was they were stealing us blind because they were starving, and they wanted our shoes and our boots, and they wanted our gasoline, and they wanted our spare tires because they would burn them for fuel. And so that was my first experience. I thought I was poor. And at least I had shoes of some kind. And so that was I began to realize that even as a poor person in the United States, I was better off and more prosperous than many people and millions of people in the world.
So
and
you were now
right.
17, 18, almost 19 by the time you were in country.
Yes, the Koreans, because so many of my fellow soldiers were in their 20s, and when the Koreans would ask me how old I was, because I really was trying to grow this very, very skinny, scraggly mustache, and so they were obviously curious, and so I told them that I was 18, and they would go, and so I was always the youngest man in my unit, and it was not a bad job to be in because I was ordering more senior enlisted people to get out and fix that line or to go up that pole and straighten that antenna.
Now, Ken, you were a Signal Corps, but this is a different war, different place.
Yeah, quite a bit different. Quite a bit different. Yeah, in my situation, really, I was a number that the government said we had to have a certain number of people in the field. I really felt that what I did was not. It contributed nothing to what was going on, and they really didn't need us there. It was more of a matter of we had to have 400,000 people in country, and I was one of those 400,000, and that was one of the things that I saw. I also saw a country where the people were being changed. It was an agrarian society that was really being changed by our presence, and it bothered me. It bothered me very much when I saw.
Well, and you
that.
were a poli-sci major, so
Yeah.
you were probably more aware of some
Yeah.
of the things that you were observing.
Yeah, and then the attitude of the military bothered me, and then also just seeing how not just combat, but many of the younger guys. And in my unit, we mostly had guys my age or older in some cases because it was a support unit. And many of them were electronics people who were trained in avionics type of electronics that would go throughout the country and work at different airfields. And my role was to contact through radio contact each day the different Army airfields. And just keep radio contact with them and pass messages back and forth. And the messages were really inane in the first place. It was just more of a matter of keeping contact. But what I saw at times was many of the young people, their whole attitude was kind of a gung-ho type attitude, and what that really came home to me once when we had an attack on the base, and there were a number of VC who were killed, and the bodies were piled up in just a big pile of bodies, and people were having their pictures taken with those bodies there, as bravado and so on. And I said to myself, this is the kind of thing that happens to people. It affects them, and I thank God that I didn't have that experience myself. Although we did have one time where our unit was attacked and one person was killed as a result of a round landing in our unit. So you always had that behind you, but it wasn't anything like anybody suffered in a combat situation, and I thank God for that.
What one experience can you think of that maybe forever changed you, though? You were not involved in a combat experience of,
No.
Given orders to shoot or
No.
be shot at type of thing.
Well, I was in a situation where the base was attacked after only about two months in country, and
Okay.
there we were in the middle of the night in bunkers with rockets coming in and everything else. But that was basically it, and then hearing a rocket engine hit no more than about 5 feet away from where we were
quickly.
Yeah. I mean, there's a certain level of fear there.
Fear,
but,
yeah.
but nothing like what somebody in combat, and just knowing that. And ever since then, I mean, I just can see that as how war is such an unnatural experience for somebody to go through, and what it does to them, or what it can do to them, and trying to live with that in the future. And I have some empathy for that, even though I wasn't directly.
But you are a
affected by
forever
that.
changed person, Ken, as a result of your experience in a foreign country under war conditions.
Well, I think I recognize more than ever of what it does to people and how people are affected by this. It's a very unnatural experience, and anybody who goes through that is going to suffer in some way in their life. I mean, you just can't. You can hide it and hide it and hide it, but it's still part of you, and it's going to affect you in your life in different ways.
And we've been friends for almost 8 years, and I've observed, Ken, as a friend, sometimes when you see stuff or hear stuff that you are visibly moved, and I know where that's coming from. Yeah. Duane, what one experience, and I know you've had several, but really changed your perspective forever as a result of, in case of Korea, and we'll touch later on Vietnam for you in a different capacity, but Korea particularly.
Well, Korea, because I was in a quiet area of the country most of the time, and I was invited to people's homes, however humble they were, and I learned to eat kimchi, which is a wonderful thing. But I burned.
Survived.
Yes, but I burned out my taste buds, I think, and I felt kind of bad because they were all off they were all off limits, because we were forbidden to eat Korean food because we would drive up the prices, and we would drive up the prices for food. And so I was not permitted to buy anything, but I could trade a can of Pabst Blue Ribbon for a 750 milliliter bottle of excellent Crown beer, which was made by a German brewmaster. And so I thought that was a pretty fair trade. I liked that. It had
So your Korean experience, though, really wasn't combat in any way,
no.
shape, or form.
It was,
a different
and of course
situation
I
as
was
well.
serving under the United Nations flag.
Yeah.
It was, and I considered, and I still consider that to be a legitimate and necessary war, which we were obligated to participate in because we were the military occupiers of Korea after we took it after the Japanese Empire collapsed. And so we had the United Nations was on a mandate to protect South Korea, and interestingly enough, the Soviet Union had a UN mandate to protect the people of North Vietnam. And so
North Korea.
North Korea,
Yeah.
excuse me.
Korea.
And so that was kind of the origin of all of that. And so I had no feelings that I was doing anything illegitimate or wrong. The United States did not intend to have a war in South Korea because we didn't even, we had only occupation troops there, and the South Korean army barely existed, and they had only light weapons, and we had only a couple of thousand occupation troops who were kind of fat with beer and were quickly overrun by the North Korean army and who had tanks and so forth, and our troops didn't have any of that. And so certainly this was not a situation where the United States provoked a war. It was strictly a defensive war and a necessary war, which we were obligated to do under international law.
Now, you served in Korea and then were able to come home. What were the conditions that brought you home out of the service? Or
Well, I served my time, and then I was assigned back to the United States, and I arrived on our troop. We'd travel on troop ships at that time in trains, and I arrived on our troop ship at the dock up here, Pier 64 or something, in Seattle, and the band was there, and the USO's donut dollies were serving us donuts and coffee as we came off, and they put us on trucks, sent us up to Fort Lawton, and they gave us clean uniforms and showers and haircuts and so forth, and handed us little slips of paper. Those who were draftees, most of them were just handed little slips of paper, which were tickets home. I was given a ticket to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, for a while until
you
my
there as well. Wow,
until
very
my
good.
enlistment was up, and
Middle of nowhere.
right. But it was, and that's. But when I got there, I was an old soldier, and combat veteran, and the other non-commissioned officers were. I was one of them. And so I belonged to the rocker club, had champagne. It was not bad, except that I couldn't get off base because there wasn't.
When your time came up to end your experience as an Army personnel in Vietnam, you came home and then you were out of the uniform one day and that was it.
That's right. I mean, it was like flew home. You went through maybe a day, or it was even less than that, of different tests, and then you were in civilian. You were a civilian. Just flew home. Came into Oakland and flew out of San Francisco the next day as a civilian.
And very little preparation from being
nothing.
a soldier to a civilian.
Nothing. Yeah, nothing to speak of.
As a result of your experiences in the service, what do you do differently or see differently now, and you attribute that to your experience being in a combat situation?
I think the thing that most changed me, or how I changed, was I had a very, when I went in, a very negative view of the military and the people in the military. And to some extent, I still do. But those who were put in the situation they were put in, and how it affected them, let's say I became a little bit more sensitive to the whole issue of being in such an unnatural situation. How can anybody not be affected by this? And being more tolerant of that type of thing. And even so today, I mean, that's how I feel about what's happening today in Afghanistan and in Iraq and so on, wherever we've been, because that kind of experience is just an experience that no one can explain to anybody, and it affects a human being. It just has to.
Cheryl, as a therapist, you've heard some themes that Ken has spoken about. What type of experiences have you come across from people who have started to share their stories as on their path to healing?
Well, it seems like a lot of times there's that moment when you recognize that the enemy is just like you. I heard a story just yesterday from someone who I think this was in one of the recent wars, you know, Afghanistan or Iraq, and they were breaking into the houses, and they had shot someone, and he's standing there with his rifle, and a 10-year-old boy begins to turn around, and he sees that the boy has also an AK-16, so he knows he's going to have to shoot him. And in that moment, he recognized that this 10-year-old boy, they had probably just killed his father. And were he this 10-year-old boy, he would have done exactly what the child was doing. So that's the kind of experience that just drives it deep. That's when you're talking about it, you know, until you've been there, it just drives it deep inside, you know, into your soul, I would say. You really get that. And yet, he had to make the choice to pull the trigger. And then, in this case, he had to carry this child out to be
Dr.
cared for.
Edward Tick, who has spoken in this area, calls this a soul sickness.
Yeah.
And part of this healing process is restoring that person to make them whole again.
And you know, it's a very natural thing for a human to be affected that way. It really isn't a disorder. I mean, you can't say that it's something it's somebody, it's a fault of that individual. That's exactly what how a human being would react from something.
I think it's just a normal condition of being a human. And of course, in Afghanistan and Iraq and Vietnam and all of the other places where we have unnecessarily attacked and occupied these people and committed a number of atrocities, those people all have PTSD. And they inherit PTSD from their parents, not to mention the birth disorders and chemical contamination and radioactive contamination, which the population of those countries is exposed to.
Yeah, for me, the bottom line is we as a country, to go to war or to put ourselves in this kind of position, we do it without really any real serious thought of what effect this is going to have. It's more of a political thing than anything else, and you need to have something to demonize. And the more we continue to approach the world that way, we're going to continue to be doing the same thing, and we're going to be affecting more and more people in this country.
You know, one of the tenets that we as Veterans for Peace hold dear to us is educating for the cost of war. And one of the things that we haven't really calculated into this is, what is it going to take to bring the people home from a war situation and then to try to restore them? I know that we provide veterans benefit assistance. We have a sign that's over to your left there, Veterans Benefit Assistance. We offer that at Coffee Strong. One of the things we're finding is these people are going to take a long time healing, both physically and psychologically, and that has expense to it. And we talk about the ultimate cost of it. We've heard the record now. One person sent to Afghanistan, the value of that soldier is $1 million per soldier. But that's all the support people that it takes to have that person on the ground. But then bring that person home, and we're hearing people coming through that have been 3 tours in Iraq, 4 and 1 in Afghanistan, and I talked with a young man today, you know, I was saying, this is what I'd like to do when I get out. And my heart was so heavy because it's sort of like, that is not going to happen. But I couldn't tell him that. But because of the injuries that he has sustained, unless it's just totally miraculous, that's not going to happen. And yet the total cost, you know, is far exceeding what we can even imagine. Duane, you also had a very interesting change in life after you've took off your uniform. You actually had an opportunity to be part of the State Department in
Yes.
Vietnam.
Yes,
and,
unfortunately.
Yeah.
But,
Tell us about that situation.
You know, I had the GI Bill, and I had experience in Asian cultures, and so I did, and studied history and English and so forth, and tried to become a literate person. And I was a teacher.
You succeeded, by the way.
Yes. And while I was teaching, and then I was in graduate school studying Japanese language, a recruiter came by for the State Department, and my brother was at that time working in the CIA, and so I knew quite a bit about this already, having taught about these subjects and these jobs. And so I applied and passed the written examination and the security clearance, the oral examination.
So you ended up in Vietnam?
And I ended up in Japan.
Oh, Japan, okay.
But after my first tour in Japan of 3 years, I got this letter from personnel saying that you are key personnel, and we need key personnel in Vietnam, and you have, so you are assigned to Vietnam. And in the Foreign Service, the U.S. Foreign Service, which is the diplomatic, career diplomats, it's like the military. You have to go where you're sent, or that's a resignation. It's an automatic resignation. Mm-hmm. And I had a pretty good career up to that time. So I thought, well, that's 2 years, I'll go to Vietnam. I survived Korea, go to Vietnam, and then I'll come back to my regular job and finish my career. And you know, I have a maybe go back to Japan a couple of times. And so I looked for other alternatives, but I didn't want to sell cement additives. And so, you know, the glamour. You know, I mean, I wanted to serve my country. I didn't want to sell bogus products. Only to discover that when I was sent to Vietnam, my duty was to sell a bogus product. It was kind of ironic.
So your role was what in Vietnam then?
My role in Vietnam was to do psychological operations or psychological warfare to convince our military to treat the population nicely and not kill people unnecessarily and not to push them around, and to help the South Vietnamese government do land reform and all of these kind of things that will make their lives better. And of course, it was all a sham. And I became quickly aware of that, and it was a bitter experience. I did get shot at a lot, but luckily I had...
By our own troops or by...
I'm not quite sure. Sometimes by our own troops who were laden with drugs. And they were just in drugged stupors, walking down the street, just firing their M16s at random, and you hit the dirt, you know, and that was dangerous.
Now, you weren't in uniform at the time?
I was sometimes in pieces of uniform.
Pieces of uniform?
Yes, well...
So you look like a semi-deserter?
Well, it was in the Delta of Vietnam, which is all water.
Yeah.
It's like the Delta of the Mississippi.
Right.
And so everything's mud or water. And so I had to wear U.S. Army combat boots, which were designed for that, so you wouldn't get foot rot. Yeah. And also, because I was trying to deal with U.S. Soldiers or sailors, and had to inspect them and make reports and order them to do things, they wouldn't, because who the hell are you? So I had to wear a military baseball cap. But since I wasn't really a lieutenant commander, I had a little lieutenant commander insignia on my shirt, buttoned into my shirt. And I had my name in Chinese characters up on the front of the cap, and so it looked very impressive. And so that was why I had to do that. But basically, my job was to stay away from large military units, go around the countryside, visit hamlets and villages, and make assessments of the political situation and how friendly the people were.
What was it in Vietnam that changed you now? Because you've been part of Veterans for Peace a number of years. Was there something in Vietnam or Korea that changed you, or was this later on that this became an organization that you decided to put your efforts into?
In Korea, when I arrived in Korea, everything was black and brown. No green. The mountains, the hills, everything, no trees. Everything was, all vegetation was stripped and burned or something, and the people were burning tires for fuel. And so I looked at that and said, God, this is what war does. And then in Vietnam, there were B-52 crater holes, craters being used for fish ponds. And they were just, I could see them running across these rice paddies and across where villages used to be, and big holes, circular holes filled with water, and the devastation. And I saw, and as a matter of fact, I walked through and went through defoliated areas where the Agent Orange had all been sprayed. I had no idea that I would later suffer from that. But, and I was shot a lot, shot at a lot and mortared. But when I arrived in Vietnam, and the first time I was shot at, I was looking out at the rice paddy, and we were under a heavy shower, a rainstorm, but no clouds. And I said, Sergeant, I think we ought to put up the top. He said, no, we're not going to stop. And he said, we're under fire. And I asked him, I said, well, gee whiz, let's take cover and get the hell out of here. He said, no. The last thing you want to do here is to act like they're getting close to you. Ignore it. Just stay at the same speed. Don't jump out, because then they got you. Don't ever stop. Don't ever acknowledge that you're in this situation. You just hold your breath, not too long, and keep going. And they will think you're not in range or that they're firing over you. And and he said, never shoot back. Never, ever shoot back unless you're like a rat in a trap, and they already know who you are.
You were there how long?
Oh, I was there 2 years.
2 years.
And
Duane, I've been given the task of letting Cheryl step in, and so that's the task that I'm going to do. And this is an hour program, and I know that you have hours worth of things that you can share with us.
I do, unfortunately.
And I appreciate that.
Decades and decades.
There you go. 8 decades.
Decades above you.
There you go.
And I'm so glad you're here telling the stories, because one thing that you guys have both made really clear tonight is that we don't know what we don't know. We don't know till we've stood in those boots with a rifle in our hands what war is. And I think we need to hear your stories so that we can consider the alternatives. We send people off to war, civilians. It's civilians that send people off to war. You know, when they tell you to pretend they're not anywhere near you, it reminds me of them telling us to go shopping. You know, that'll take care of everything. Just go shopping, you know.
But in shopping, you're not told not to shoot.
Right, you know, right. So So I'm noticing that, well, that I'm really glad you're telling your stories, so thank you. And we need to hear them, and we need to know the truth and take that into consideration when we're making our policies. And I also noticed that I've heard several times this evening from different veterans who've come on the show that a lot of self-judgment, and I know that's really real and deeply felt, and I also feel deeply that that's very much a misperception, and a judgment that needs to be corrected, but it needs to be corrected by those of us who are in the community who can look and say, we sent you there, you know, we carry this responsibility, we have shoved this responsibility actually off on you, but it is not yours to bear alone. And I guess if I can, I'll just give a little bit of a plug for free counseling. Since I'm not selling anything, let me mention again the Soldiers Project. Soldiers Project Northwest is a group of therapists who are volunteering 1 hour a week. They're just civilian therapists with training to work with military. And they will volunteer their time to work with anyone who has gone and served in OEF, OIF, I should probably say what those are. Anyway, in Iraq or Afghanistan. And their family members at no charge for as long as it takes. And I'm hearing that we're expecting about 18,000 people to be returning to our area. And so we have a huge need, and that's just the service, that's just the men and women coming back. That doesn't include all the families and all the other people impacted. So I want to let you know there are resources out there, including the Soldiers Project, and you can see the website on the screen, and all you need to do is contact them, and we will match you up with a therapist who can help walk alongside you as you tell your story and return to your life and reclaim your life.
Well, that's a very important service, because as we do counseling with active duty personnel, one of the things that they're most concerned about, particularly those that maybe have 1 or 2 years and then they're retiring and whatnot, they do not want to get that into their military records. And you have that confidential service where if they need that help. At Coffee Strong, they even have an acupuncturist. I can't even say that word, but provides acupuncture once a month. They come in, and there's a lot of people finding relief for that, and counselors like yourself. Also, on Fridays from 10 till 2, we're at Coffee Strong on exit 122 off of Highway 5, and we provide the Veterans Benefit assistance to some, because a lot of people have not been told what is their rights once they leave the service, or even before they leave the service. Find out what it is that you need before separation, or if you're a veteran like our two gentlemen tonight, what benefits have they earned and how do they go about claiming them? So that's one of the services that Veterans for Peace offers through Coffee Strong in Lakewood, Washington. Soldier Stories, Past to Healing and Return is a series that our program, the Rachel Corrie Chapter 109 in Olympia, Washington, is currently using until we can find no more soldiers or anyone else willing to tell their stories. But we encourage others who are viewing the program to let us know. You can contact us through the website, www.vfp109rcc.org, and you can then be on the program so we can tell your stories. Or if you're out there and you would like to tell your story as part of your path to healing, we would like to talk to you. We appreciate the opportunity to be here in the studios of TCTV in Thurston County. And we have the opportunity to have our program shown on Channel 22 on Wednesdays at 5 p.m. and on Fridays at 9 p.m. And then most recently, we also have our programs on Blip TV. We want to thank you for for watching.